Welcome back to the Afterword, a conversation about the future of words. We are so glad to have Dr. Jeff Dancy and Sarah Guggemos of Tulane University here with us to continue our conversation about conspiracy theories, where they come from, how we can recognize them, and the best ways to debunk them. So we talked a lot about what conspiracy theories are in the last episode and kind of where they come from and a little bit about how they spread. Why do people believe conspiracy theories? Are we just hardwired to accept these ideas?
So that's the million-dollar question, Holland, that guides all of our research. It's our belief that we all fall onto a spectrum of conspiratorial thinking, because when pressed, almost any individual will admit that they feel skeptical or doubtful about at least one historical event. So you could think about the moon landing, the Kennedy assassination, Area 51, the list goes on. But there's a great study that was done in the UK in 2012, which identified that survey respondents who believed that Princess Diana faked her own death were also more likely to believe that she was killed by a rogue cell of British intelligence officers or that she was killed by the Fayeds. And this study revealed that belief in conspiracy theories isn't about identifying a monological belief system, but rather an enduring skepticism and lack of trust in an official narrative. So it isn't so much that it's hardwired into anyone to accept conspiracy theories writ large or a specific kind of conspiracy theory or belief system, but it's especially because distrust in an institution or an account of an event can be caused by various reasons. So it's not a hard wiring, and there aren't hard and fast rules about psychological determinants or group identities that cause us to believe these things. It's more that anyone can fall on this spectrum, that you could have distrust in the narrative that comes from Area 51, but not believe in other theories, or you could believe in Area 51 and a lot of other things.
Yeah, and just to follow, that's a really great point. And Sarah has done a lot of great research in this particular area, trying to identify the proneness to believe in a conspiracy theory or to perpetuate them. But I think that we shouldn't think of it as an individual psychological phenomenon. We should think of it as a social phenomenon, right? These things spread in communities. And they're a part of political movements, right? And those things have emergent properties that are larger than the psychologies of any given individuals. And so if we looked at, some studies have turned up evidence that some minority communities like the African American community are more likely to harbor conspiratorial beliefs. Other studies have not found that evidence. So there's some evidence, not a lot, but you could interpret that the wrong way, that African Americans are hardwired to believe conspiracy theories, or there's some kind of genetic cause of that. Well, that would be ridiculous. There's not some genetic cause for believing in conspiracy theories. What it is that there's a history of structural racism in the United States, and it informs distrust in the African American community, as we were discussing before. And that kind of perpetuates conspiratorial thinking in some places. Like I mentioned in the first episode, or the first half, about the levees in New Orleans, and the idea that the government probably breached the levees on purpose, or the idea that the government spreads bad vaccines to poor communities. Well, it's because both of those things have some basis in history, and they've affected a community in a very terrible way, and that sticks with people. And so Sarah and I share, and this is why we kind of decided to do research together. We share the idea that we should try to take blame off of the individual and their psychology, and stop saying you're a paranoid conspiracy theorist, and instead try to understand why these things emerge in our society and what we can do as a collective to help people and help communities kind of develop better ways of engaging with the world and develop greater trust in their governing institutions.
Wow, I so appreciate that. I think reframing how we come to conspiracy theories. There was an episode on another podcast, and they were sharing how we're hardwired to believe the truth. And it is good to think that way, because we have to, sometimes it has to be proven to us, And so I love how you all are reframing that a little bit. But, not all weird theories are conspiracy theories. And you guys were alluding to that. And maybe not all conspiracy theories are wrong. Some things that were once accepted as facts have been disproven. I think about some of the medical things that I went through as a kid that no one would ever think about doing now this day. But we've also learned a lot about neurology, artificial intelligence, and many other topics that we have been doing on this podcast. And a lot of our mainstream ideas just aren't ringing true as the research advances. So with that being said, when we hear a story or an idea, how can we be skeptical without being cynical?
So there's a process that you can follow by asking yourself the same series of questions when you feel that inclination to be skeptical of an event. The first is that, am I actually trying to explain something, or am I merely expressing a mood or attitude? Am I just repeating something that people like me say? The second, what exactly happened? Who exactly caused it? What and how did that occur? 3, how many people who have to be involved for this account to be true? 4, who is conspiring and how are they so good at making plans? 5, am I attributing to malice that which may be explained by incompetence? And 6, what evidence would falsify my version of events? Because all those questions allow you to be skeptical, to look into the cause more deeply and to think about it, but they also kind of ground you in a little bit of a reality. So before you go spinning down into the folklore or the rumor about an event, you can think about how likely it is that this actually happened and whether or not you're just repeating something that's been parroted around you.
Yeah, I'll give an example. So I think that I got caught up in the I think that I got caught up during the Mueller probe of believing quite a few stories or rumors about the relationship between Putin and Trump that I found to be very alarming. And there might be a relationship there, but it's not abundantly clear in an evidence base. And so after a while, I had to say, am I kind of parroting these ideas about like tapes or compromat that Putin might have on Trump because I've done the hard work of investigating this theory that Putin's got some, he's controlling our president? Or am I just kind of aping what other people around me are saying? And I think that I was just aping what they were saying after a while. I was getting a lot of information from a lot of friends and a lot of media sources that were all directing me to think that. And so then I say, am I just repeating this, or do I actually have a theory here? And so when you try to then form a theory and move away from slogans or just kind of like headline news titles, it forces you to say, like, what exactly do I think is happening and what is the evidence for it? Right. And that's what you really need to do. That is being skeptical and being skeptical of yourself. And that keeps you from being an absolute cynic. If you're always skeptical, then you never believe anything fully, and you realize that we're all fallible. And to be an absolute cynic, you have to actually believe that we're all terrible and there's no truth in some ways. And I don't believe that, just like I don't believe that we're ever completely developing a theory of everything, right? We're never going to know all of the truth. But it doesn't mean that there's no truth. Let's stay in the middle. Let's do our best, right? And develop theories and test them with evidence.
So good. All right, Sarah, I'm gonna challenge you with a meme or a infographic on those 6 questions. So,
Okay.
we need it in a succinct fashion. So
Yes.
we can flash that up. I'm a teacher, so I need to see it. It needs to be visual. So something that will give us a clue on how a tool that we can actually use so we can be skeptical, but not cynical.
Yes. Like stop, drop, and roll.
Trust, but verify.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
So do you want us to actually produce the meme right now? We have to do it on.
Yeah.
Let me find a picture and then.
Yeah. No, we'll give you a little bit of time to research that.
No. So I mean, what? Just a simple kind of. I mean, there are all these tests like Occam's razor and Hamlin's law. Occam's razor is what's the simplest answer, right? And is it what I've come up with? Is there a simpler answer than what I've come up with? For example, if you're a 9/11 truther, how many people would have to be involved in this conspiracy for it to come off? It would have to be tens of thousands of people that were in government, in the Pentagon, in the World Trade Center, in the New York municipal government that would have to all be part of this. And not to mention the Bush administration and the Saudi government. It's like a huge conspiracy theory. Is that really simpler than just a group of terrorists decided to attack the United States? No, it's not. And usually the simpler account, right, that kind of has more leverage. Another thing is Hamlin's law, which is don't attribute to malice that which could be explained by incompetence, right? So we often assume that the government, quote unquote, or people in general, businessmen, Bill Gates, they have these sinister plans where the truth is probably that they're all just kind of muddling through like we are. They're doing their best to come up with plans, but those plans regularly fail, right? And if there are conspirators in the world, they have counter conspirators, and they're in a huge mess of other conspiracies that are going on all at the same time, and they're all running into each other, and probably most of them are failing. So the short thing is like, am I groping for certainty, and is my explanation actually does it actually work? Does it actually does it have evidence behind it? Those are the kinds of key questions. Am I trying to find certainty where there is none, and is there evidence for this?
Excellent. Thank you. I still want the infographic.
We'll try.
So if someone believes a conspiracy theory, if someone has secured their certainty by believing that the Illuminati or some group is controlling the world, what's so bad about that? Why should we try to debunk that?
Yeah, that's a real. I love that question, actually, Holland. There's nothing wrong with forming and testing conspiracy theories. Period. I mean, like I said, we study repression. We know that there are conspiracies to commit acts of atrocity, right? And we want to root those out and hold people accountable for that, right? A conspiracy is a crime that somebody can be criminally charged for committing, right? And that's written into a lot of legal codes. And so it makes sense to have the concept of conspiracy and to sometimes consider it, right? The problem, I think, is another thing that you said, which is believing. We are averse to the idea of believing in any theory. You don't believe theories. You write them and think about them and test them. And so if people have conspiracy theories and they're open to testing them, great. But if they're believing them against all counter evidence, not so great, because then we don't generate progressive research programs that move closer to the truth.
And I think that what Jeff is talking about is evinced really powerfully by true crime podcasts, because you'll see a podcast deal with something like JonBenet Ramsey's tragic death. And it's okay to theorize about that because we want closure, and it's a confusing and deeply upsetting event that happened to what seemed like a very normal family, which makes people see themselves in the case. And it's okay to theorize about that because we don't have closure about it and it's confusing. But when you start to believe any one theory too rigidly, then you're enacting harm on other people. I had a friend who wrote her dissertation about the co-victims of true crime podcasts and looking at what happens to families when a case about something that happened to their loved one gets blasted into the media. And suddenly they become victims and their human rights to privacy and these things are being abused because people feel that they're entitled, that their belief is more important than this person's lived experience. And so I think that that's that fine line. A podcast might talk about something, about a specific event that happened and theorize what the closure would be if they could generate it. But when you take that belief and you follow it too rigidly, you start to harm other people and communities.
Boy, that secondary effect, that collateral damage could be horrid. I hadn't even thought about that before.
That actually leads me to another question that I hadn't thought through in advance. So if this is a poor question, we'll just get rid of it. But when you talk about true crime podcasts having that secondary effect on folks, I mean, I grew up in the 80s, and on the back of milk cartons, there were pictures of kids who had been abducted. And I've read since then that is actually the number of kidnappings and child abductions declined quite rapidly in the 80s and 90s, and that this wasn't the issue that it was presented to be, but it terrified everyone's mother. And so there was a lot there, people became much more structured. No, kids couldn't play in the front yard. No, they couldn't go down the street. No, they couldn't play in the backyard. No, they couldn't ride their bike. No. We had to do all these things that were very structured. And so it changed the way that people raised their children, even though the facts may not have supported the fear. Are there almost unintentional conspiracy theories? I mean, probably whoever put those things on milk cartons really wanted to help those children, right? Is that a thing?
So there was another study that I found in my research, which is that if you induced an anxiety prime with a group of survey respondents and had them look at a variety of images and ask them to identify patterns, if you put a prime in front of them, like you just lost your job, or something that would really induce feelings of anxiety, they were more likely to see patterns where they didn't exist in every case. And so that's not surprising to us when you put photos of children on the back of milk cartons and every mother's waking up in the morning and every single morning she's seeing a picture and looking at this child and imagining her child being kidnapped, disappearing, murdered, whatever the tragic event may be. They're more likely to see a pattern that this is happening more often than it is, even if that isn't true. And so I think anxiety is always a crucial thing to kind of consider here when generating these sort of theories.
Yeah, and I think that your question is about like how changes in the information ecosystem, which we referred to earlier in the conversation, drive social patterns, right? And it is the case. I mean, I think a sociologist in New Haven, he's at Yale, has studied children's experience of their surroundings in their environment and the radius that so he just studied like how much do you know as you go farther away from your house, right? And in the 1960s there would be kids as young as like 5 or 6 that knew things that were 3 or 4 miles away from their house because they were always outside, they're moving around with older kids or moving around with their parents. Now children that are like 15 years old don't know anything outside of their neighborhood. And it's because they're on lockdown, like you're saying, Holland. And it's because there was in the 1980s a satanic panic. People thought that kids were being ritually abused by Satanists, which was a kind of conspiracy theory that was propagated in a number of books. But there was also this idea that like, child abductions and kidnapping was rampant. And the milk carton thing was part of it. The milk carton thing only lasted 3 or 4 years, actually. And we all remember it. It was because it was terrifying. And so
it was. Yes.
Yeah, there is this thing that happens. Or think about everybody in the 60s and 70s hitchhiked. It used to be just the way that people helped each other get around. It was actually kind of a community element, right? Now, you're seen as like absolutely insane if you go hitchhiking because it's just assumed that you're going to be murdered. That's a wild thing and it changed pretty quickly because people started spreading stories, urban legends about people getting murdered while they were hitchhiking. And it's probably happened a couple of times, But to think that would happen every time is overblown. And we've done that quite a bit in our society with spreading paranoia and spreading fear of, people think that violent crime right now is much worse than it actually is. Violent crime is far down compared to the 80s and 90s. I mean, we're in what some people call a violent crime trough. Like, things have gotten markedly better, but everybody thinks that it's worse. So what explains that gap in perceptions? And specifically in the US, it seems like we're more prone to this. Why? It's a social phenomenon. It has to do with our information ecosystem. Long answer, sorry.
No, that was perfect. Again, this taps into some of those bits of truth, the folklore, the rumor, because you have heard of someone who's gotten kidnapped. I still remember being a kid in Northern Virginia, and 2 little girls were kidnapped, and everybody was looking for this like yellow paneled station wagon. And it was just phenomenal. It was like, it became this story that was larger than life. Never found the kids. So those things are rooted. So you're right about the conspiracy theories, and yet you use that word. I really appreciate, Geoffrey, about believing rather than testing conspiracy theories. But we all know people who believe without testing conspiracy theories. And so how do we help them? I'm kind of the mindset that people have to come to recovery and healing on their own. You can't really help anybody with that. But if there is a way to provide information to support that person in their belief system, what would you tell us to do?
Yeah, my main approach, I think, as an educator, that also sounds pretentious. As a teacher, I'm not an educator. But
yes, you could say that, Geoffrey.
I could say it, but do I want to? Yeah.
Okay.
No, as a teacher, I think that my main enemy is orthodoxy. I don't like orthodoxy. And Sarah's been in classes that I was teaching where I probably got into territory where I was questioning orthodoxy that all students kind of believe these days. And I won't mention what it was, but it was a very unpopular class because I'm just challenging kind of ideas that they have about the theories of change or that they're just things that everybody believes, and it can be any group of people, and they could be from any walk of life. But I don't like orthodoxies of any stripe. I don't want people to just believe things. I want people to test their ideas. And so how do you walk somebody from being an Orthodox believer to being heterodox or for questioning orthodoxy, right? That's tough. And maybe it's not for everybody, but it's certainly for students. And it's certainly for some people that are seekers. And so what is often helpful in that scenario is that you present yourself as somebody that's sympathetic to their ideas, right? You did it earlier, Holland. We were talking about QAnon, and you said, well, there are sex traffickers in the United States. Jeffrey Epstein was one of them, and he had a lot of powerful friends. Well, that's a starting point for talking to somebody that believes in QAnon. You could just say, I think the Jeffrey Epstein story is awful, and I can't believe that existed for so long, that he was able to get away with everything he got away with. But I'm not sure about the leap to this is the engine behind democratic politics as a whole. So could you walk me through that, right? If you start that way and ask somebody to explain it to you, then you're having a conversation. You're not pointing fingers. You're not saying there's no evidence for that, right? If you do that, it just gets people's back up and they become even more orthodox. So the way to challenge orthodoxy is to frame your inquiry as being you're just a fellow truth seeker and you have questions just like they do.
And there's Jeff pointed this out to me when I started this research, which is the way to dialogue with somebody who believes in any theory. One of your great entry points is there any information in any, maybe you are resolute that it couldn't happen in this reality, but is there any evidence that would make you not believe in this theory? And if they say no to you, then the conversation's not going to happen. If they're not willing to entertain the theory for theory's sake, even if they really believe it, then you're probably not going to get anywhere with them, and any attempts at debunking are really futile.
Excellent advice. Because obviously this isn't going to go away. We're still in the midst of a pandemic. We've still got lots of things flying, and social media as it is doesn't take long for one little meme to become infecting. I love how you pulled epidemiology in that and how that can spread. So appreciate that insight.
And Amy and I even know how epidemiology, the word epidemiology, came to be, because we learned it on our public health episode a few weeks ago, right?
Absolutely.
So, and if you choosing that word was a great choice.
How old
It
is
really
that
was.
word? How old is that word?
Ancient Greek.
Really? Okay.
And it isn't really actually the best way to determine that word. If you listen to our podcast and you listen to our guest, he will explain it beautifully. It's wonderful.
Good plug. I'll go back and listen to it. We'll have a listen.
All right. Well, we have one final question. What's a metaphor to help us understand conspiracy theories?
I thought you were just going to ask us what a metaphor was, and I was going to kick it over to Sarah, who's an English major. Sarah might have her own. Mine is the music industry. So oftentimes when I'm trying to explain conspiracy theories to people and the economy of conspiracies, I just revert to talking about the music industry now, which has also changed with our new information ecosystem. What did the music industry used to look like? It was that it was controlled by some pretty big record labels and distributors, right? And that bred a corruption of its own, but you basically heard hits that were intentionally put on the radio, and they were generated to be hits, and they were hits, right? Now, there aren't really hits, and there's not really radio, and everybody's streaming, and it's like completely decentralized in many ways. There's still record labels, but they're trying to figure out how to handle all of this. And so the way that songs come about now and music is produced is similar to the way that conspiracies are. It used to be that you have to publish a book, and hopefully with a big press, and making the conspiracy claims, and then people would read it. Well, you don't have to do that anymore. You could just make your song. You can make your conspiracy theory and put it up somewhere. So musicians have SoundCloud, and conspiracy theorists have 4chan, right? And you put it out there, and if it's popular, people like it, then they'll spread it. And then maybe you, on the back end, will get a lot of clicks, and you can make some money off of that, right? So there's a decentralized kind of economy of conspiracy theories. And within that, there are people that make a killing off of conspiracy theories that are at the top of the heap, just like there are in the music industry. There are the Beyoncés and the Jay-Z's of the world, the Drakes, right? And there are, in the conspiracy theory world, the Alex Joneses and the Jack Pobiesiaks and these types that make a lot of money off of spreading conspiracy theories. And so I think that's a good metaphor for their dissemination and spread, and for the development of this economy. And I think that we should think of it like an economy that exists in our society. And that's a good approach.
And I think the metaphor that I would put in place for this goes back sort of to the lifestyle example I gave with minimalism. You could say the same thing maybe about veganism, that this is a belief and a theory about how to live your life that is popular to people, that for some people it gives them closure, it feels moral, it suggests health to them, and that becomes popular. That rises into the cultural canon of ways that people feed and nourish their bodies. And for some people, that becomes an enduring lifestyle practice. And that's okay. That's great. That's what they want to do. And where we would start to have a problem with that is somebody who tries to punish or spread purposeful disinformation or misinformation, depending on the mode of transmission, about people who are not vegan for a variety of reasons. And then we'd say, okay, you're causing harm to some other people, or if you're spreading dis or misinformation, again, depending on how it's being communicated, then that's a problem. But it's okay for you to feel that the theory of veganism applies to your life and makes it better as long as that's not hurting other people. But I would use a lot of lifestyle examples I think you could put in place of that.
Sarah's is good because she builds the harm principle into it, right? It's okay to believe whatever you want to believe as long as it's not harming other people. And there's a lot of evidence that conspiracy theories and conspiratorial movements, which is what we focus on, are harmful. And that's what we worry about. So my music example doesn't really cover that. It's just mine's about the kind of spread of the ideas. But in music, there's not really harm. People can listen to whatever the hell they want to listen to, right?
And you could say, and this is not, I don't want this to be interpreted as equivalency between veganism and QAnon, but you could say that there are a lot of vegans who get very political with that, who want to influence outcomes with our food industry as a whole. And so there are acceptable ways to influence democratic society, and then there's unacceptable ways like storming the Capitol. So.
Wow, that is, these are great metaphors, and I really appreciate the scope and sequence, if you will, on the spectrum. Excellent. Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was a very powerful way to end. Jeff, where can folks learn more about your work or connect with you?
I have a personal website that's just jeffdancy.com. Folks can visit, and there's a lot of stuff that needs to be updated, sure, but you can get the gist. And then Sarah and I also are running a project that will eventually have a website called tjtools.org, which is about holding people accountable for human rights violations. So that's something that will eventually be live, but we're still in the research phase.
And stay tuned for a publication eventually about everything we just discussed.
Yeah, we're working on a conspiracy theory paper, but I have 2 small kids and they get in the way, to be honest. And so we'll get it out and we'll send it to you first.
Sounds like a conspiracy.
It does. It does. Sarah, where can folks contact you and learn more about things that you're doing?
For the time being, our website, tjtools.org, will be going live sometime soon. It's not quite up yet. We're still in the beginning phases of that project. And with this publication, for the time being, those will be the places to find me. I'm new to this world, I will say. I just graduated, so all exciting.
All right. Thank you very much. Join us next week for a conversation on hobbies that do good things for our world and people's lives. We're changing focus just a little bit.
Yes, a little bit. But as you wait for that next episode, we ask you to please leave us a review, rate us on Apple Podcasts or whatever you get your podcasts. Do become a subscriber to theafterwordpodcast.com. It does help us keep the conversations going. And as always, remember, you are welcome at our table.